Bill Carroll, Z62 Media, and I'm still working my way through this most recent draft class, position by position. And correction, I think I may have mentioned Julian Ashby, who's a 231-pound guy and like 6 feet and 5/8, as I think I mentioned with as an offensive line group. He is not. He is a long snapper, the only long snapper drafted. And I used to joke around like the fastest guy in the draft, sometimes to be drafted by the Patriots. Not Patriots, by the Raiders, sort of as a tribute to late Al Davis. And that felt like a Bill Belichick tribute pick from the Patriots, picking up Ashby, long snapper. That's the only long snapper, so he's done with. Now we're going to move on to the linebackers. The Falcons took Jalen Walker, who some people see primarily as a pass rusher at the next level. I think he's going to do a little both. He's going to play some stand-up linebacker. He does understand coverage enough to drop into that curl zone area, and he can run well enough to stay with a lot of tight ends and running backs and even a few slot receivers that you wouldn't. That's not ideal, but I believe he'll be a guy that reduces down, puts his hand in the dirt in some situations, probably third down or even sometimes second and long. So that's a good football player. Once again, Buckus Award winner. Jihaad Campbell is the first true linebacker off the board. From the old sort of 4-3 school of linebacking, he's a true middle linebacker who frankly could play the other positions as well at a pretty high level. Day one starter, right? The first two players off the board. The Falcons at 15, and of course, the Eagles at 31 pick up a player who will play early and often. Swessinger at 33, the first player off the board in round 2, goes to the Browns. He picked up a lot of steam late in the process. Was a guy that was definitely seen as a early day 3, probably, and worked his way up to very early day 2. Partially through people going back looking at the tape, and also it's the NFL media and the people around the draft catching up with what the NFL scouts already thought of him. Then an interesting pick to me is Demetrius Knight going to the Bengals at pick 49. Obviously, the Bengals could need everything on defense. So it's not a bad pick. Demetrius Knight is one of those players that divides some draft rooms. Some people think he's a guy who's a steal even at 49. Some people think he's a guy that should have gone mid-round 4. He has some really definitive strengths and weaknesses. But he can drop into coverage. Once again, another guy who has the ability to cover. Definitely some things to work on. I don't dislike the pick, but he had some really good games and some not so good games in his times at South Carolina and, of course, even prior to transferring. Mike Green. Well, this is maybe the steal of the quote-unquote linebacker group. Now, the question is, do you, once again, like with Jalen Walker, is he truly a linebacker? He can drop into coverage. He can, run well enough, once again, to cover tight ends and some running backs. But frankly, if I've brought in Mike Green, I brought him in to rush the passer. He's the most developed, the most refined, the most ready to play of all the pass rushers in the entire draft class. He has a wide and effective array of moves. Name a move, right? He's got probably 80% of the stuff in his bag already that some of the top pass rushers in the NFL have. So, huge steal. Once again, there's the character question marks already addressed. I feel like they felt comfortable enough to take him there. And once again, at 59, an enormous steal. Then we get to pick 75. The San Francisco 49ers are rebuilding their team on the fly, right? Preparing the plane while it's in the air is very challenging. Nick Martin from Oklahoma State is another player that feels like a guy who's going to play a lot and play early, and he can play multiple positions, as a linebacker, not multiple positions, beyond linebacker, but he covers well enough to be your coverage guy, but he also can rush the passer. He's good against the run. And then next we come to one of those, once again, character in a good way picks. Jack Kaiser is fairly close to average in everything you can measure as a player, as an athlete. But he is such a terrific person and once again, Notre Dame, finishes late in the season. He shows up to the Senior Bowl. I asked him at the Senior Bowl, why are you here? Why are you? He says, because it's a chance to play football. I get the feeling he would play football in a parking lot for $2.50 and a hot dog and a beer. The whole does he love football thing, not even a question with Jack Kaiser. The Jaguars are really trying to build their culture. He's a guy with that winning mindset. good pick, though he may never maybe more they maybe average starter. Just his locker room stuff makes him a good selection. Danny Stutsman to me was a little bit of a steal at pick 112 to the Saints. Another do everything linebacker, still a little bit better coming downhill than dropping back, but can drop into coverage and has made some impressive plays in coverage. He's a playmaker. I think that he could end up being, if not a day one starter, a starter before the season ends, his rookie season. That brings us to the Cardinals, pick 115, Cody Simon. I don't dislike the pick. I think that Cody Simon, once again, we're talking about players with fits and limitations. Like they can go some here and do well, some other places might not do as well. He's tough and strong, right? He would have been an even better player 30 years ago than he is now. I worry about him a little bit if he's asked to do a lot of coverage. But once again, we'll see. Maybe I'm wrong. And then next up, Barrett Carter. So Barrett Carter is a player that at one point, if you talk to people about him 2 years ago, would say, oh, that guy's going to go in the first 50 picks or first 60 picks. I won't say he tailed off in his career at Clemson, but I will say that he didn't develop to the extent that many people, including myself, have projected he would going forward. Gets his chance, right? Goes to the Bengals, who, like I said, could use everything. He could become a starter. The Bengals could use everything on defense, and he's a guy that has talent. When he was a big-time recruit, has a chance to be a big-time steal. David Walker, once again, linebacker in name only. This guy's a defensive end, basically, an undersized defensive end, but my, oh my. My two favorite pass rushers, right, Mike Green and David Walker, in this whole draft class are listed as linebackers. I truly believe that they're going to use him as he should be used, as a designated pass rusher, who maybe occasionally drops into coverage. I won't be surprised if he's a guy that in 2 or 3 years is a double-digit sack producer, especially if he plays enough to do so. Kyle Kennard, another big-time recruit, another guy who was actually do big things in college, had an okay college career, but goes to the Chargers, another team that could use an influx of young talent, gets his chance. Here's one of my favorite picks amongst the true linebackers, right? Your 4-3, Sam, Mike, Will linebacker. Teddy Buchanan's a really, really smart football player. Cal grad, shout out to Zenny, but can do a little bit of everything. Very good in coverage, can come up and stop the run. Maybe you'd like him to be a little bigger, but he's a good enough athlete. And he's not undersized. He's just not a giant. And once again, the trend has been to slightly smaller players amongst the true linebackers. Here's one of the biggest sort of, picks, right? There's a player that I thought would go at least around round and a half. Even 2 rounds later would not have shocked me. But with pick 132, Robin Hippolyte II, right? Things to like about him. Terrific athlete. Maybe the best pure athlete in the entire linebacker group. And he's had some good games, don't get me wrong. But this is a player I feel like you could have gotten, if you wanted linebackers you've gotten, maybe that I think are more ready to go day one. Slightly undersized, but runs. I mean, he can run like a scalded dog. He's got okay instincts, not exceptional instincts. He's going to at least contribute on special teams immediately. Could he eventually become a starter? Possibly. I wouldn't call it a reach because, no one's really a reach at 132. But I do feel like he was slightly overdrafted. And that brings us now to Q Robinson, another player who may be asked to put his hand in the dirt and rush the passer some as well. Another player, of course, from Alabama. Alabama's still just, producing defensive talent. I don't think he ever becomes a full-time starter. But I think he contributes. Shamar James, right? The run on Shamar's. Shamar James is a player that I think potentially could be a starter. But once again, definitively will help you in situations and helps you as a special teams player. This is the player that I think maybe the Bears should have taken with the 132 pick is Jeffrey Bassa from Oregon. Another do-everything linebacker. He can come down, once again, not the biggest cat in the world, but but they don't care that much about size. They just took, Hippolyte II. But Bassa is a guy who can be your green dot guy. He runs well enough, can play Will, could play Mike. You don't really use Sam that much, but if you do, he could be that. Sometimes gets swallowed up by blockers, but other than sometimes getting overwhelmed at the point of attack, he pretty much does everything else at a fairly high level. And then my third favorite pass rusher in this draft class is also, well, I mean, beyond Abdul Carter. I'm not counting it, right, beyond. So my fourth overall, but not counting Abdul Carter. Colin Oliver. I think he could be, in the right situation, a double-digit sack guy, at least a 5.5, 6 sack guy, even as a situational player. And he goes to the Packers, who I'm guessing will use him correctly once again as a designated pass rusher who occasionally drops into coverage. Terrific player from Oakland State, and I think one of the great steals of this class. Then we get to Smail Mondon Jr., shocker, a Georgia player drafted by the Eagles. He may not be a day one starter. He may not be a year one starter, but I think he'll eventually work his way into the rotation. Another guy who can drop into coverage. Good in coverage. Not great, but good in coverage. Decent against the run, but can do a little bit of everything, and very good athlete. And then one of my favorite players at the linebacker position in the whole entire class is Chris Paul Jr. Super high football character, super high human character. Once again, not the biggest guy in the world, but he's big enough. And once again, he's not undersized by today's standards. 20 years ago, he would have looked at as undersized. And can do it all. Once again, really understands coverage. Could be your green dot guy. Very good against the run. Are there some plays on tape that I'm sure he'd want to have back? Sure, he's bitten occasionally on some things. Sometimes takes a false step. But generally speaking, above average in all areas. Above average athlete, above average instincts, below average size, or average and below average size. But everything else, above average across the board. Future starter, if not for the Rams, maybe for somebody else. Good player. Jacksonville Jaguars get Jalen McLeod. McLeod's a good player. I think he's most likely a rotational player, a specialist. But would it shock me if he became a starter in a couple of years? It wouldn't shock me. Once again, I'm going to just spend a little time on Kobe King. Another one of those players, sort of like I talked about, earlier when we talked about what Barrett Carter didn't quite manage to become. But, actually, let me go back. I jumped over Francisco Muaga from Miami. Another one of those move-around linebackers, right? Can get definitely bullied at times in certain situations where he gets bounced around on the interior of the offensive line, things like that. But if you get him in space, good at identifying things, good against the screen, good at fighting through blocks on the move, has a little trouble in space. I mean, not in space, like in constricted areas, but it's good at fighting off blocks in space. Can fight through blockers if he's on the move. Can fight through, the trash, as they say. Good tackler. Not great, but good tackler. And once again, above average in coverage. Sorry. You could eventually be a starter for the Jets down the road. Now, let me get back to McLeod. I think McLeod's mostly a situational player who, will help on special teams, see the field, spelling people. Is it crazy he could become a starter? He could eventually become a starter. I wouldn't bet. I'm not betting. I think it's less than 50% that he's a long-term starter in the NFL. Kobe King. Now, back sort of like with Barrett Carter, a player that people were expecting to take a big jump. Didn't quite happen. A variety of things have happened to him in his time at Penn State that maybe kept him from fully showing what he could be. But I would say 37.5% chance he eventually becomes a guy who starts for 4 or 5 years. And then that brings us to Kane Medrano. So it's a fairly... most of these guys move fairly well, right? There are a lot of space linebackers in this class, not a lot of hammers. And partly it's because of the way the game is changing, which is why some teams are going to go back to running the ball down your throat because they're looking at a bunch of linebackers where I think the heaviest one in the group is about 243 pounds. And a lot of these guys are in the 220s, upper 220s, low 230s. So the 250-pound linebacker is almost gone, nearly extinct, right? These guys are 243 on down for the most part. But once again, similar body type in both Medrano and the guy that's picked right after him by the Raiders in Lindenberg. So Medrano is another player that would have been considered just a run and hit, run and chase Will in the old days. Nowadays, he might be a Mike just because of the way the game has changed. And then Lindenberg, right? Reminds you a little bit of Chad Greenway, another guy who can stay on the field all 3 downs, but can definitely occasionally, once again, I mean, I know it's like a broken record, but a lot of these guys can, if you're pulling, you get out on him, and he can get smashed around a little bit by guards and centers if you pull the center. Just because, once again, these are not, you're not going. There's no Seth Joyner, right? in the bunch. There's no Jeremiah Trotter Sr. in this bunch, and definitely not a Brian Cox or John Offerdahl or, we'll never see some of these guys again, right? I mean, the days of the 272-pound linebacker are probably gone forever. Or at least true linebacker, real linebacker. Okay, and then last but not least is Carson Brunner, the last of the linebackers on the board, going to the Pittsburgh Steelers at pick 226. I think if he does have a chance to become what he will become, the Steelers maybe give him the best chance. So it's a good fit culturally and what they like to do on defense. I still think he's probably a reserve for most of his career, but once again, from a famous football family, right, related to Mark Brunner, the lines are there. High football character, you like the instincts, not special in any one particular way that you can pinpoint, not a freak athlete, not good instincts, but not elite instincts. Good player. But this is the linebacker group, and I think that you're going to see some undrafted linebackers also stick on some teams, but I'll be moving on to the next position. I will see you there. Once again, Bill Carroll for Zinni 60 Media. Please like and subscribe.